Yep.
Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I welcome you. I'm very excited about today's webinar because it's a great topic and we've got some great speakers. But before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time you have a question for any of our speakers, please don't wait, don't hesitate. Just use that question and answer tab there on your interface and submit your questions. And I know that Jeff is going to pepper the webinar today with questions from the audience. So please don't wait to get those questions in. Also, we do have a polling question during today's presentation, so hopefully we can get everybody engaged with that. And also want to remind you of that very interactive chat panel that we have. So we do encourage you to become a part of today's conversation. Please go ahead and chat us your questions, comments, suggestions, whatever you want to share with us. We will keep an eye on that chat tab and we just might chat you back. And then finally, at the end of today's webinar, we are doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you'll be one of our 4 lucky winners. All right, with that, let's go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is Progressive Release Management is the key to DevOps. That is a bold statement. Our speakers today are Aaron McCann, sorry about that, who is VP of Product at Plutora, Ben Wanson, who is a Senior Product Manager at Platora, and Jeffrey Kais, who is the VP of Product Marketing Strategy at Plutora. Gentlemen, thank you all for joining us today on the webinar. And Jeff, I know you are going to lead the conversation. So as always, I'm going to take myself off camera, put myself on mute, and I will see you at the end of the webinar.
Fantastic. Thank you, Charlene, as always. And a shout out to Aaron and Ben, who are, what part of the world are you gentlemen in again?
Sydney. Yeah, we're sitting here. Sydney?
Yeah.
Nice,
sitting here in Sydney.
Morning.
Yeah. So it's like 3 a.m, right?
It is, yeah. Nice morning.
Yep. Yeah, it's
Early
amazing.
morning.
I know when I had to get up with the kiddos in the middle of the night, I didn't look as good or coherent as you both are. But thanks. This is going to be a great webinar just to kind of get the thing started. In the chat, if you can find it up over on the right-hand side, love to know what your favorite holiday is. What's your favorite holiday? Would love to shout out and kind of hear from folks this morning. We've got a great set of topics, but just want to kind of warm up. So you see that over where you see chat, you'll see where it says public. Just put in your favorite holiday and we can talk about that. Today, we're going to talk about a really cool discussion, frankly. Last week, we had an announcement at Platora. And so Aaron and Ben are driving our product teams and have some really cool features they're going to show you. But the background for it is why do we need to rethink and rework in a world of release management? And what does that actually mean? And with that, we'll go through to how release management can transform into a new style of release management, which we're calling progressive release management. And from there, look into insights driven and managing by acceptance, and looking through the process of de-risking releases through evaluating build analytics. And then from there, getting into unsticking some of the DevOps initiatives and really improving the capabilities we have there, utilizing flow metrics and other metrics. And then ultimately into guiding delivery of initiatives and aligning business objectives to what is actually being worked on. So by all means, I see a couple of comments coming in. Thanks for joining. Love to have you put in your favorite holiday. I see St. Patrick's Day. I can understand that. That's a good one, of course. So by way of background, Platora, we got our start back in 2012, and one of the initial groups that we targeted as a role were release managers because they had spreadsheets and all sorts of details about managing complex software delivery. Typically, these are larger companies where there's lots of dependencies. And as the dependencies grew, the amount of work and information gathering they needed and increased dramatically. So much so that really the job and the role expanded. So the teams got bigger. Their job was to ensure solid delivery into production. And so some organizations had release management just as cutover. And then as they found they needed more and more information, they started to reach further and further left into the software development cycle. Doing that required a massive amount of information, not only to gather, but information to present to others and coordinating resources, coordinating people, coordinating teams, because change was the constant agenda. Really left this team as in a state of what's being termed as death by 1,000 shoulder taps. Always another issue, always another problem. Hey, release management group, go solve these problems. Meanwhile, the entirety of the job is purely reactive and somewhat hair and fire. Nothing to do but react to the big issues that were going on. And that's really where Platora, we got our start. And when we got our start, we provided data to these release management groups. We helped them get out of spreadsheets and actually visualize what was going on more. Well, as DevOps tool chains have progressed, we've done a better job of integrating that data in and pulling that data together. One of the things we've seen with progressive release management of some of the features and things that we're going to talk about today is we've been able to help release managers get out of being reactive but proactive, managing by exception. And the result of managing by exception is to really improve the flow of work, so much so that we've seen customers double the feature throughput with the same team, not necessarily that many more deployments to production, but getting so much more in the pipe. We've helped teams improve their DevOps capabilities through automation, through the amount of deployments, through the amount of incidences, through the kinds of automation that they need, which largely in the enterprise IT are stuck. And we've been able to help them reduce risk of incidences and reduce the actual number of incidences. We've got cases as, better than a third that by implementing these practices and putting the release managers into a new role of progressive release management, not progressive as feature flagging, but progressive more as modern. It's a different style that works into the future. And as these data brokers and coaches to product teams, these release management groups are now able to really impact software delivery in a way that they've never been before. In essence, they've become the new heroes of software delivery because as data brokers and as people to guide software delivery, they're able to change the game of how software is actually delivered. With that, we want to get started with a poll, and I think Charlene's going to help us with a poll just to kind of kick things off here. Charlene, do you want to push that poll? So the question is, what kind of metrics do you currently evaluate right now for your CICD pipelines? And go ahead and answer that. You can pick as many of those kinds of metrics that you're currently using. Do you look at deployment failure rate, escaping defects, cycle time? What are you currently looking at? And where does that hit in your cycles? So we're going to dive into how all this works. I want you to notice that we're going to have a cool book for you to download that's going to tell you all about this and how to actually operationalize this. But in looking at the poll results, it looks like just about everybody looks at the deployment frequency as one of the key metrics of DevOps, and find that really interesting. Aaron, Ben, what kind of metrics do you expect people are going to look at?
Yeah, well, I mean, like you said, deployment frequency is pretty common. I mean, I'd love to see some more probably throughput, lead time and cycle time. Probably we'll find out later why that's quite key areas. But yeah, I think deployment frequency, I'm not surprised with that one.
Yeah, and the other thing, or the key things to look at, as you mature in your pipelines, is like the quality of releases. So looking at your incident rate to releases, those kind of indexes, and yeah, throughput is key. And how often are you releasing? What type of release are you doing? Are you doing more planned releases, or compared to your kind of emergency releases or hot fixes? Those kind of releases, because that's about being that reactive state versus that planned state and delivering more value.
Absolutely. Thank you. We can go ahead and close that poll. So progressive release management, it's a thing. You really can double your feature throughput and accelerate your DevOps transition. Download this book. We've got a whole bunch of everything we're going to talk about today, as well as a lot more that our platform does. We'll walk you through how this works. But let me kick off about it's time to change existing release management and the things that we need to do in that world. Aaron, I think you're going to take us through a few things here.
Yep. Yeah. So really, I guess the first question is, so what do we mean by, having data-driven release management? So Jeff, as you pointed out, there's potentially whenever a release is happening or in a given month in these large enterprises, you're going to have multiple teams, maybe 50, 60 different teams, all delivering software, impacting multiple applications, all impacting multiple CI/CD pipelines. And it's really hard to get a control of or get visibility and get updates on what's happening across all of these teams. As you kind of alluded to earlier on, that death by 1,000 shoulder taps. That's also accommodated with a lot of chasing up, a lot of emails, a lot of individual reports coming in from different teams, messages on MS Teams or Slack and those kind of things. And it's really hard. That's like you spend most of your time, chasing and running around. And in addition to all this stuff, all these teams, they want to be increasing their throughput and delivering faster. That's the whole goal of, CI/CD and DevOps, to be able to deliver more value for your business faster. And release management, we want to be able to facilitate that. But in order to facilitate that we need to kind of move away from the reactive kind of constantly putting out fires here and there and actually, mitigating risks as early as possible and using data to kind of identify where the hotspots are. And so when you think about, so first part of that there is getting all this information into one place where you can easily focus on it and manage it. And so when you think of what we have up screen here is just a screenshot of our release management module, but that gives us visibility of all the releases that are currently happening, let's say for a given month or a week, and then you can start seeing which teams are releasing, what applications are they impacting, who's involved, and then start seeing the insights, the progress of it. Are they following the process that you've laid out for them to follow for all teams, to ensure that they're meeting all their compliance and regulatory requirements? Is there anything going amber? Is anything overdue? And the scope items as well. So that's just your process of the release itself. Then you start looking at your scope items. Is there things sitting in backlog that, you should really, have nothing in backlog or nothing in blocked at this point in time. You're about to move into the next phase and you need to be able to monitor that there stuff as well. And you can also be looking at things like the volume of change and things that are coming through. That's an indication of risk as well. And then also having the insights in as you execute the release, having the insights into test progress. So it's really important to get all this information in one place. That means I can come in here, I can look at all the releases that's happening, get insights into the progress, and then start following up where I need to. So you start managing by exception. And so really, the next question is, how is this done? Where to start? Well, that sounds great, but planning is kind of key to the success of all this stuff. The more planning you can do, the further down the pipeline you can see to see what's actually coming in. It's really critical to start, planning and mitigating any kind of potential risks as early as possible. So once you can start seeing the pipeline, maybe seeing 12 weeks, maybe a whole quarter in advance in a bit of detail, you can start seeing if there's a large number of scope items coming down for one particular release, that's a high risk area. You can start seeing if there's a large number of applications being impacted, that's also potentially a high risk area, more than usual. And you kind of think, okay, we've actually got more impacts coming in the next few weeks. And if we start working with the teams and just kind of understanding, what needs to happen. And then also really important here is to start mapping out the dependencies. So as there multiple teams potentially impacted the same application or impacting upstream and downstream applications of each other. And so tying all that together and getting all that visibility up front is really critical. And that sets you in good stead for your execution.
Love it.
And then once you go into that execution mode, then you can start monitoring the progress, start looking at the insights, making sure that, people are following up on all the activities that they need to do or tasks they need to complete, making sure they're satisfying their gate criteria before they move to the next phase of the release. And also making sure the scope items are moving. Nothing's sitting there in a block state, or that team that had a high volume of changes, making sure that they're actually comfortably getting through everything and everything is moving to the right state before you move on to the next part of your release. And immediately being able to see what's overdue, what's not happening, what's amber. That immediately means that, okay, I know where to focus. I didn't have to spend all my day chasing people down. I can come in here now. I can see what's on the board. I can see where I need to focus. And also then as well, when you get into testing and that sort of stuff, SIT, UAT, if test progress is not progressing the same rate as everyone else, or a particular release or a couple of teams are falling way behind, that's where you need to focus. If there's a particularly high number of outstanding defects, maybe you've got like high severity defects more than usual, again, it all just immediately draws my attention to where I need to focus. And that's critical, because what this actually means is I'm spending less time chasing around trying to gather the information, and it means I'm more efficient about how I identify risks in my release and how I can start reacting to those risks and working with those teams. What that really then starts doing is freeing up my time. So then I can start focusing on helping teams, improve their processes, looking at where, and doing more on the kind of retrospective aspect of things and looking at, well, how can we actually improve this process? How can we make it better? How can I work with teams to start, doing better release planning, following the process better, maybe automating more steps that are causing a lot of manual, slow parts of the process. And that's really where we kind of see release managers kind of fitting in more in that DevOps world to kind of enable that growth and enable that, progression into from like heavy manual processes, long waterfall project releases, and moving more into the agile and true DevOps way of working.
So it really is taking people from a, reactive, traditional release management governance, sort of a sense like not adding value, but sort of a tax of doing software delivery, to being this world of proactive coach to the team. Here's data provider. That's
it. And you can come back to your teams with data. You know what I mean? You can come back and kind of say, look, you've got a history of maybe late scope changes. You got a history of struggling to get through regression. Maybe you need to start looking at, what's your batch sizes, reduce your batch sizes because you're always struggling to complete regression. You're always introducing too much more than you can actually, facilitate within the release schedule. Or, you've always got these dependencies in your applications. You need to start working on, you've always got these regression issues coming through. You need to start automating these things, or automating these checks, or doing more upfront to plan for these dependencies. With data, you can provide insights back to these delivery teams and really help them understand, okay, yeah, now I can see where some of the inefficiencies, some of the lack of planning in my processes is having an impact on me whenever I go to release. And that's key. And so really good planning is absolutely key. And then it really just, from that point onwards, it makes managing the execution and managing the deployments much easier.
Love it. And as I'm looking here across the releases and the going across the portfolios, I see that there's problems. What do I do next? And where do I take, how do I follow that next?
Yeah. Okay. So the next thing is drilling into it and getting that next level of detail. So, once you kind of identify where your hotspot's in, you want to start drilling into it. And I kind of like, one of the key things is looking at what are the relevant data points that you might want to start tracking here. So as I said, it's the scope items, the status of all the scope items, making sure everything's moving, making sure that there's no, one of the other things to also keep out is making sure there's no late scope changes, so better planning, more structure and release, more you can commit to actually what your scope is. You're not having to rip things out last minute. And also you want to, I know it's an easy thing to do, but you want to avoid, too many last minute changes and squeezing things in, because they're potentially the things that will get you that, it was a low. it was a minor fix. It's not
Sure.
going to impact anything, and you squeeze that in because it looks so small and simple. And next thing, you've got an incident in production. It was like, yeah, that little config change actually caused a really big downstream impact. But those kind of things, and those kind of facilitating those best practices. Also then working with, looking at your regression, your test metrics as well, and also ensuring that you're not just ready from an IT operationals perspective, but also from a business readiness perspective. So, depending on, it's not just about being operationally ready from IT, it's also making sure that your business is ready, making sure you've got the right sign-offs, making sure people are aware, making sure you've gone through the right change management processes as well. And, it's important to know these things, because once you know it, and once you can see how your history of this year and how you're progressing on a more regular basis, then you can start addressing these problems. If you're kind of saying, okay, yes, we're constantly, falling behind, we're constantly going amber at some point in the releases. Why is that there? One, is there wait times? Is there handoffs between teams? Are you waiting for approvals? And have you got dependencies across teams that you're not getting traction with? And so once you kind of have the insights, then you can start diving deeper into it to kind of figure out how to mitigate it. So the first step is mitigate it for the release that's happening. But then next step is take that progressive step, that progressive release management, and start looking at, well, how can we prevent this on an ongoing basis? It's a trend now at this point in time, and we need to curb that trend to start going the other way, so we can start, improving our release management process.
Love it. Well, and so can you talk just a bit about, what we're seeing and where this data comes from?
Yeah. So obviously, it's important to where all the data comes from. It comes from a disparity of different tools. So you might have your planning tools where, your backlog is formed and actually getting that information in there. Your ticket tracking tool, maybe a Jira where all your scope items are in there. Maybe you've got a test tool like ALM, where all of your testing progress is in there. And again, this kind of paints a picture of why it's so hard to get a clear picture of what's happening. When you've got planning in one tool, then you've got sprint execution in another tool, and you've got testing in another tool. It's really important to get all this information back into one spot. And maybe you've got your impacted applications in your ITSM tool. So like you've registered, okay, there is a change, it's impacting these assets. So again, you might have 4 different tools where all this data needs to be coming from. That was the real hard part, and that's really what Platora helps kind of solve that, getting all that information into one place where I can see my whole process end to end. So from my planning to my execution to my testing to my actual change, and also to planning for my deployments as well, all in one spot. And that's really getting all that information, getting it in there, and then that enables that data-driven, much more easier, enables that data-driven release management.
Love it. And talking of reducing risk, I guess we should talk about how to, talk about more, what other areas where you can find risk information. So
absolutely. So look, one of the big trends right now is CICD, and the promise of CICD is you can start getting to the point where you can release smaller code deployments more frequently, faster, increase your time to market. Also, you increase your MTTR by having a more mature pipeline. If something does go wrong, you can recover, and it really facilitates that iterative approach to agile methodologies as well. So and also combine that with dark features as well, where you can iteratively progress and grow features as well, with fast deployments and fast time to value. But the reality is, just adopting CI or CI tool doesn't really just mean that you've got CI/CD. You know what I mean? So like a lot of people might use Jenkins, but they don't necessarily have the most mature CI/CD pipeline in the world, because not all pipelines are equal. And as I mentioned at the start as well, you might have to 50 or 60 different teams, and they could be impacting multiple different pipelines. And you need to kind of know the maturity of these pipelines up front, so you can kind of start assessing the risk that is coming into your release by the result of, we're hitting a lot of really well-established CI/CD pipelines following the best practices for CI/CD, versus, we're seeing a number of applications being impacted that, I know they're not really a mature CI/CD pipeline. They're not really, they've adopted tools, but they're not really it's not true CI/CD. You know what I mean? And so we can use some of these build metrics. So if you jump onto the next slide as well, we can kind of just dive into a bit of that. So what are the kind of some of the key things you want to look at? And so as I mentioned, you want to be assessing the maturity of these pipelines. And so if you're looking at, high deployment or high build frequency, that's a good sign that your teams are adhering to good practices for CI/CD. That means there's regular check-ins to a centralized branch. So it means your developers aren't coding in isolation for longer. They're actually following that continuous integration practice. And it also means that you're probably dealing in smaller batch sizes then as well. So the more regular it is, the smaller your code commit sizes, the more, as opposed to coding away in isolation, and then all of a sudden you merge in and you've got like large code sets as well. And when you're looking at build duration as well, build duration is a measure of efficiency within your teams as well. So, you want to reduce that feedback time by having a faster build duration as well. And your success rate is also very key. If you've got high success rates, well, it's a good indication that your teams are doing a lot of good code checks before they commit their code. And if you see high failure rates, it means that there's probably an issue with the process, the way they're working. They're not really following the best practices. There's a lot of failure rates. Another good indication when you start seeing very randomly a spike in fail rates as well is that might be an indication of a high risk change coming through in the pipeline as well. So you can look down and kind of say, well, actually, your build metrics for this particular release or this particular change actually shows a lot of failure rates. Are you changing something fundamental that's actually, causing a lot of breaking changes in your code? And those are kind of good indications up front. Okay, that's a bit of a high risk change. And then seeing the size of those releases coming through, the regular size of the commits.
But don't individual teams already have this kind of information?
Maybe individual teams do, but individual teams all use different CI/CD pipelines. It's very hard to get all of this, and different applications are different instances of the same application. It's very hard to, some might be using Bitbucket, some might be using Jenkins, some might be using CI Circle. And within even if they are using the same teams, it might just be a little bit different. And it's really hard to get all this information into one place. So bringing all this one place, Platora is completely agnostic about what tools you use. It's got simple APIs that you can just integrate and import this data, and you can start building an overall picture across all your pipelines, irrespective of their methodology or tool set they're using. It's a common data model. And so, one of the key things as well, it's a good indication of risk as well. And really important to see the historical trends of this is deployment frequency. We mentioned deployment frequency at the very start about probably chatting about the production. It's actually interesting to track deployment frequency in your lower environments as well, because what you want to see is probably in dev, you'll probably see very high deployment frequency. It's happening. Ideally, it's happening on a very regular basis. But as you kind of get to your higher level environments, maybe you're sitting in your UAT just before production, you want the deployment frequency there to be very much aligned with your deployment frequency in production. If it's not, it's an indication that you're finding issues late in the process all the time, and you're doing new builds at a very late stage in the process. Every time you do that new build, it's way more costly and way more inefficient because you got to start and get it software all the way back up to UAT again. And also, it's an increase in risk. Every time you do that new build, it's a new increase to risk. And especially if you've got a lot of manual processes in your release pipeline as well. So as I said, maybe not everything is automated as well as you would like it to be. And every time you're doing these late builds, you've got to go through a lot of that manual step, a lot of that manual process late in the game, and you're increasing risk. And
so are there other metrics to consider here as
Definitely, yeah. So it's really, those metrics are good, and those metrics, again, it comes back to good planning. And whenever you're planning those things and you can kind of identify which pipelines are going to be impacted, you can look at this stuff. But it's really important to overlay this with other metrics. For example, I mentioned like build frequency, and you think, well, we should have a high build frequency, but you can't really look at that metric just on its own. You need to look at your release frequency as well, because if it's not a heavily impacted or heavily changed area, it's probably likely to have a low deployment. It's not many code things happening, not many changes in there. So you've got to look at these things in connection with other metrics. So when you look at your overall release throughput, the the volume of change that each of these teams are putting through, and also then the quality of the releases, the incidents as well, that might be happening, or defect slippage that's happening into SIT, UAT, and production as well. You combine all these things together to kind of paint an overall picture of maturity and quality of individual teams' release lifecycle, and the pipelines as well. And there's one thing we chatted about as well. We mentioned about why is this an enabler? Because it probably sounds like I'm very much introducing a witch hunt. We're going to find all the weak pipelines and we're going to hunt you down, and we're going to manage the hell out of you. But really, this is having these metrics and having these data points then facilitates good conversation and kind of saying, if you want to be able to release on demand, if you want to be able to release at the end of the sprint, this is the kind of behaviors that we need to see. And then once you kind of start seeing really good patterns, really reliable, the metrics and the KPIs all going in the right direction, and reliable releases fast, and the teams have introduced really good automated processes within their pipelines, then you can start kind of maybe adjusting your release templates and your release process to ease the amount of governance, so that you're actually only applying the level of governance and rigor where it's needed. And for the teams pipelines that have matured and that have really, really excelled at adopting CICD best practices and DevOps, you don't need to be applying the same level of governance for teams that's not. And so you're not going to frustrate these teams. You're going to start helping, enabling teams, and give them a goal, and having data to kind of help, provide insights back to the team as to, this is what you need to do. This is, if you want to start being able to release on demand, if you want to start releasing outside of the enterprise release cycle, sure, I want to facilitate that as well. As a release manager, you want, it's good for the business as well. So having the data means that you can start having the conversations with teams again. This is what you've got to do. This is where you've got to get to. And then once we kind of achieve these kind of goals and KPIs, and metrics that we've set for ourselves and targets, then you can start facilitating those process improvements and start going, yeah, okay, now we can reach that, Spotify, Netflix, what we hear about, that release every day, release multiple times a day. That's a long way to go. It's a big, long journey to get there. But having these kind of insights and having these metrics in one place are really, really key to this tier one. And all the metrics Ben will chat about in a second or two as well, which are kind of key and extension onto this year one, the value stream management metrics as well that we also provide.
Awesome. Well, and speaking of that, all of this relates to the DevOps adoption. In adopting DevOps, I think has been problematic in the enterprise. Ben, what? There's the latest state of DevOps report that came out. What kinds of things did we learn from it?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of blue on these charts, that's for sure. There's not a lot of other colors, and it really shows that sure, there's been some movement at the top and the bottom, but there's still a big chunk of people who are in that kind of that middle area, the high mid to low mid, that they're not moving forward. That they've achieved some things from DevOps. They've obviously gotten better. They're fantastic. For some areas from code commit to deploy, but they're not getting that level as as Aaron said, the Netflix of the world. They're not getting to those high performing areas there, and we really wanted to have a look at this today and understand why are these things getting stuck? What's happening here that's not happening? And one thing that's a very key to part of this is a thing called theory of constraints. So the idea is that if you've got a pipeline or a value stream and you've got a bottleneck, improving any other part of that system does not make you go any faster. No matter how much you pump into the before or after the bottleneck, doesn't change it. So if your bottleneck was just code commit to release, then DevOps is your answer. You've fixed you fixed that bottleneck. Maybe you create another one somewhere else, but you've fixed that bottleneck. But if your issue lies anywhere before code commit to release, if it's not there, then DevOps is not going to give you that straight away. You need to look further into that. You need to look at the areas that happened before that. And what you really need to look at is value stream and your value stream flow metrics.
Gotcha. So value stream and value stream flow metrics start to give us that answer. So how do we unstick the DevOps? How do we get this unstuck then?
Yeah, sure. So the idea being is to understand the whole area. So if we look to the right of the screen, we've got your MTTR, your cycle time, which is obviously
Sure.
code commit to deploy. You've got your you've got your deployment frequency, very very popular. But I want to move everyone over to the left-hand side of the screen to shift left over to here, because that's what we're really doing here is we're looking at metrics that measure the whole value stream. And when I say value stream, I mean all the activities that go from ideation through to realization of value to the customer. And we released this a few months ago. We've had incredible take up by our customers and plenty of people looking for it as well. Is that the throughput? So like how much are you doing? Not just how many releases you're doing, but how much value you get into the customer. So at the top, the top left-hand side there, you see your towers going up and down. You're seeing what's making them up. What sort of things are we doing? A lot of bugs. There's a lot of risk-based work that we're doing, or is there, or are we doing a lot of feature work? And we work around there. And then you see, your little donut chart there. What is your work in progress? Because there's definitely a correlation between your work in progress to how well and how much throughput that you have. And you've got to start understanding this. There's you can just see the top of it there. You got your distribution of your items that are coming through. That gives you how long is your lead time, how clustered is it, how performant are you. Flow efficiency, another very key one that we do when we measure in Platora is, sure, it took you 10 days to do it, but how many of them were actually active days that you did? Now, and then you've got your distribution, you've got your cumulative flow diagrams. But what all this does is that, as Aaron was talking about, understanding risk and understanding how you're performing, is you see further into your pipeline. You see further into your value delivery. And from that, you can understand if there's other areas in there that are causing you issues. Is there something that's happening, maybe not in your release process, but in how you're sequencing or getting your work from execution? How are you doing for your planning work? I mean, we've had customers come to us and say, we want to link up our data from Wave, from our planning area, because that's the stuff that we're quite interested in. Is as much as we care about what happens in execution, we're having issues in our pipeline before it even gets to the team to build. And as IT, we're getting told, it took you 6 months to do this, but they look into it and say, well, we only built it in a month. It took 5 months to get here in the first place. You can't clobber us for that sort of work. So what it does in progressive release management is it's getting its data. You've never had more data, but we've also given that data insights to see further into the future. I was kind of thinking of that movie Tenet, where everyone's moving one way and you're moving backwards from the future, sort of thing. So you're actually moving back. You've seen where this is going to end in the future. You've seen the pipeline. You've seen the flow. You've seen how it's worked, and you're working backwards for the future, knowing what needs to happen now to get that release happening on time. So it's really using that data to increase the throughput to help, obviously, your job in release management, but also as Aaron mentioned before, to coach and to work with the rest of the teams, because you're where the rubber hits the road. There's no realization until the release manager puts it out there for the world to use. But you can look backwards in time and you can plan and you can work ahead to see what's going to happen. And that's going to unstick DevOps. That's our thought, is that once you understand the whole flow of value, you can understand where you can get better at it.
Love it. You have any examples of how this has helped some of our customers?
Yeah, sure. So we have one customer turned it on, flicked the switch, brought in all the data from the planning system, and straight away on their distribution chart, we call it a swarm chart because it looks like swarming bees, but they could see their outliers. They saw a particular one that they said, this can't be right. The data's wrong. Nothing takes 2.5 years to get through all the way to the end. And it had gone through, I think it was 12 releases it moved across before it finally got there. And when they drilled into it, they found that it wasn't even a story at all. It was just a shell of a piece of a ticket that they just kept putting stuff into over time when they're parking and then bringing it back in. Now, as you can imagine, from a risk perspective, a piece of work that's never what it actually says on the title, that eventually will go into a release 2.5 years after it started. I mean, that would keep me up at night as a release manager, or what that's going to break when it comes through. So, and it's a massive anti-pattern for what they're doing. So, it's understanding those outliers, it's understanding where you can get better, and it's understanding that end-to-end flow. I mean, when you turn these things on, you start to see these numbers, and sometimes they can be a bit hard to understand. And you think, that can't be right. It doesn't take us that long, or we can't be 12% efficient. But you start looking at where things happen in that pipeline, and they're not always in the release management side of things. They can actually happen much further up in the value stream, but they, release cadence or your release things really, really good, making sure you're getting things out. But how long did they take to get there in the first place? If they've taken
Yeah.
2.5 years, it's a very different story than if they started a month ago.
You bet. So where does this data come from?
Well, that's the great thing. And as Aaron said, we're data agnostic. So we have very simple APIs. We suck this data in. So we've seen people, across all their planning tools, from ADO to your Jira to your Rally. I can probably write enough. You've got obviously your ITSM. You bring in your just your Snow or your ServiceNow information. But also one area I've seen very keen people are doing is that early on area. It's the wave data, or it's the ideation data that comes out of your ahas and stuff like that. People are very keen to see that information as well. And like I said, if you're in one tool, you only see what's in that tool. You integrate into it. Where we're a platform, so we just want to suck that information in, and it's that wide-ranging view that gets all those areas is really a key to what we're finding at the moment.
Something that I hear a lot as a marketing guy, it's like, well, that's great. Let me get back to working on my, deployment automation and my yada yada. Well, I'm going to get back to regular work. What's your advice for people on when they should start tracking these DevOps metrics and these value stream flow metrics? All these value stream management metrics. When should teams actually start tracking them?
Yeah, I mean, there's no time like now. Like, seize the day. So this information is out there now. It's happening whether you see it or not. These things are happening. So really, it's as soon, and all you have to do is connect these things up, is to run these calculations and to see it. So there's some people may say, I want to do my transformation first. I want to set up the teams, then I'll collect this information. But what I really want to focus on is once you have this data, once you can go and say, I've seen stuff in our pipeline that took 2.5 years to get there. That's a whole different database conversation that you're going to have with someone than if you say, I don't think it feels like we could be going a bit faster. It doesn't feel like I talked to a guy at the pub the other day, and he said that he was releasing twice as fast as we were. So I think this is a database conversation, and so that honestly the best time to do it is as soon as you can.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Aaron.
Open that there. Like, what's really important in value stream management is knowing your current state, and so start tracking your current state, because then you can start setting your future states, and then start tracking, are we progressing in that area one? And also as well, most teams are probably doing retrospectives. They're probably doing sprint retrospectives. They're probably doing release retrospectives. And maybe there's a wider engineering group having, kind of reviews and kind of scorecards and putting together metrics and how they're performing. Those are the check-ins. Those are the check-ins to kind of say, are we getting better, or start capturing this here one? And that's the kind of forum. And then you can go back to, okay, well, we still got to deliver. We can't spend all day analyzing metrics. We still got to deliver software. But they're the checkpoints to come in and actually start, assessing this information. But to Ben's point, there's no time like the present, and knowing your current state is critical for your, growth forward.
Well, and I've got to imagine the amount of time it takes to capture these metrics. I mean, if you're going to do this manually, can you describe what that would be like?
It'd be a very big spreadsheet, I should imagine, at some point. But but yeah, exactly right. I mean, and then you got to pull them out. You got to manually extract them. Maybe you've got you've got a Tableau, or you got something there. You can probably link some of them up. Some of them's going to have to be manual. But also, one of the things we find too is the common data model seems so key to what these things do, because everybody does agile different. Everyone have different statuses and states. Mm-hmm. What it means to be accepted. I've seen so many different versions of accepted. I think, accepted means we've accepted that we want to start working on it. Oh no, it means that we've accepted that we want to deploy it. Oh no, it means we've actually already deployed, and someone's accepted it, that they actually got it deployed. So it's really, even if you could get all this information into one area, normalizing it and making it actually, apples to apples would be such a big job that, you'd only do it once a year or once every 6 months. And then, so, you can imagine how much you might go off track in 1 year. Or I'll come back to this on, the 1st of January next year. We'll see where we got up to. You don't have to do that. This should be real time. You need to kind of shut down that feedback loop and to bring this data in there and learn as you go.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. Well, here's something I never thought I would see in a release management discussion: deliver on business objectives. Tell me about this, Ben.
Yeah, well, we've talked about how efficient your pipe is, whether it's be looking at your release performance, or it's looking at your build metrics, or your value stream flow metrics. But in the end, this is all delivering value to a customer. This is all, and all working out to make you know, your product that people love. And then often what happens is there's an offsite, there's a bunch of OKRs or KPIs or a bunch of other acronyms that comes back to team. Oh, these are the initiatives that we're going to hit to do this sort of work. Let's set them up. Business says, here's the work to do on IT, go make it happen. And no one knows what happens to those initiatives. They don't stop. They go amongst other teams. People talk, didn't we do that the other year? Or isn't that what we did last year? Or they're multiple years and they just become buckets to put things into. So really what happens is you don't have that visibility and you don't see the decomposition to the IT world. You don't understand of what you're delivering. And, to make it why is it important to release managers is that, you want to be releasing often, yeah, but you also want to be releasing the right work. You also want to make sure that when people have things that go across multiple releases, that you understand when that adds value. Until that last story hits production, that initiative hasn't been completed. You haven't realized the value. And we're just finding as we talk to our customers, they're saying, oh yeah, we don't know how many initiatives we have or where they're up to, or they even worse, they say, oh, we got them, but we kind of make up where we're up to. We kind of go into everyone engineers in PowerPoint and goes, yeah, no, we're about 90% through. I reckon we'll be done in a couple of days. So we really want to bring more data and both visibility into that, but also once again, using the data to work out exactly what you are, having proper and data-led conversations on these things.
Yeah, Ben, I got to be on one of those customer calls with you. It was really fun to sit and listen to a VP of application delivery as he was describing, look, we have hundreds of initiatives. I don't even know which ones are still being worked on. Mind-boggling to me. And that's not to single anybody out, because I think that's been more the norm than the exception. We as an industry have gotten so used to projecting and saying, look, we're going to make millions by investing into this. And we kick off projects, and that's where all these projects have started in enterprise. And then nobody ever follows up to say, did we actually do that? Did it work out well? Seems like kind of a shame. So yeah. What are we doing about it?
Well, what we're doing is we're collating that information, we're bringing it in, and we're basing the progression and the progress and even the prediction of when it's going to deliver on data. And on data that's not just, it's not just velocity points, or it's not just something that's a bit more opaque. It's understanding, well, what is our throughput? Well, how much are we delivering on a particular initiative? How much is in there? How much are we adding scope to it? And we can use in that to say, well, if your throughput is one story, one epic or one feature a day, and you're saying that you're gonna get through this in a week, and there's 30 things to do, you're not going to meet that. You're going to understand your throughput doesn't allow you to do that. The math doesn't line up. This is not rolling up to a meeting and putting in PowerPoint. I think it's it's a rag status. It's green because I talked to the guy near the water cooler and he seemed pretty confident about it all. Yeah, he gave me the big thumbs up. Yeah, he's trustworthy. But yeah, we're making database decisions here. We're understanding. We're decomposing that initiative into all the different areas from features to epics down. We're understanding where they're at, who's completing them and how they're going, and how often we're completing them to make these decisions. So at any time, we can kind of drill up and drill down on what's in our value stream to understand when it's going to be delivered, how it's been delivered. And if there's issues, let's swarm on it and get it done, because, there's one thing to release, these little bug fixes here and there, but to release the big initiative that the big boss said that had to happen, to understand that this is what's the priority that we need to do, and that's what needs to get out there, then it's a whole different discussion. You're not just, releasing for releasing sake. You're releasing to add value in there and really giving that visibility for people to understand and be able to drill in to see what they're doing. If we look along here, on the left is all your initiatives. You move around, is what value team, who owns it, because there's always an executive sponsor. If there isn't someone who owns it, then it's probably not a very good sign. Mm-hmm. The value streams that are moving it. So if the third column, if I walk you through, is that all the value streams, because there's interdependencies, there's different teams that work at different cadences, and there's obviously risk that comes with that. And then what's the progress? What's the percentage, which is really good. But the next one is that, are we on track? And once again, this is not are we on track, but a gut feel sort of thing. It's that on track is a calculation on your past performance. Is it my throughput? Is if this is how many things get released every couple of days? If we're not meeting those goals to get this thing done by the end of the quarter, you need to raise this up. And this is live data that's real time. So we need to make these decisions now. We can bring up this dashboard tomorrow, and it may make a whole different sense. As Aaron said, late scope change, or they decide to add some more things into it, and suddenly we're blown out. Well, you've got more things than you could possibly deliver in the time you have. It's time to cut scope. Work across, what type of work it is, and the throughput, and just get an idea, is your throughput up or down to what you're expecting. So this is really about, progressive release managers understanding the value that they're releasing, understanding the work that they're doing, and understanding the value that they've contributing to as a team, and getting better at it as well. Because now the data's there, there's no reason not to understand the context of the work that we're doing now. It's time to take that information and be the heroes of the software development world, is to make sure that you're delivering on time and helping the organization give value to your customers.
I love it. How do you mentioned something about value stream flow metrics? How does that fit into this list of initiatives across the organization?
Yeah, that's fantastic. So obviously, work doesn't just appear in production. It's delivered there through value stream. So, the third column there, it's a little bit harder, a bit small, but you can see the value streams that are delivering it. But also for an initiative, you can see the throughput. Throughput is a very key metric. There's a lot of things that impact it, whether it be WIP or it's your cycle time. But really what we're doing is we're using that information as a flow metrics of saying, well, we've shown you how good your pipe is, how good your value is, but how good are you at delivering this particular initiative? How good is it? Because it's going across teams and they're going at different cadences and they're going to go different ways. But what's your throughput for the one area? So we're using that data from flow metrics to show value realization.
Love it. All of these things we've been talking about, I really like this different style of looking at release management from being an old school sort of data gatherers, project managers. As I heard one executive mention, if my release managers burn out, I don't care, I'll hire more, to, using release managers from a context of hero and data provider and coach to the product teams. It's a very different look, but if they're truly able to improve the throughput of teams, that's massive. I don't know what other group is other than a separate architecture team that's trying to create the new pipeline. I don't know any other group that's actually sitting there day to day trying to improve the efficiency and quality of software development. And yet here we are. The core of value stream management deals and addresses with 4 basic problems. And those problems we've actually been touching on in various shapes or form. We've got all these different teams that are developing software in different methodologies and styles and tools and so forth. And yet it's really still very hard to see what's happening along any single application delivery pipeline. There's different tools, there's different teams, even from planning to development to quality to delivery and then the operations and value recognition. And the tools are distinct, the goals are different, and so thus you end up with fragmented visibility. Well, if you can't see what's happening at one application delivery pipeline, good luck at seeing what's happening at the portfolio level, including initiatives, including dependencies for individual releases, and that's where the challenges lie. Some of our customers are massive. And in fact, as one customer said, they have a bigger software development team than Facebook. It's huge, the amount of effort that goes on, and you add with it the legacy architectures and the infrastructure that's there, and the different states that the pipelines are in. It makes it a huge problem for trying to track and control what's going on, including managing the risk of software delivery. Well, the only way to really manage that is truly to have a way to manage the different kinds of methodologies and the different kinds of pipelines that are there. They have to be independent of whatever technology or tool set, and need to do that, because otherwise you just, you can't optimize what's there. Well, and if you can't see all that, fragmented visibility, poor management of disparate methodologies, good luck with having any system for, guiding continuous improvement. These flow metrics, these DevOps metrics, all these metrics help you, as I think, Aaron, you said, draw a baseline and then use that so you can prove that you're doing better. That's the point. Well, this is where Platora comes in. We're a value stream management platform. All we do is we pull data in from across the portfolio, bring it into that common data model you've been hearing Ben and Aaron talk about, and normalize it in such a way that the statuses line up, the priorities line up, the states and so forth. And then there's a management and workflow and orchestration that sits on top of that to help puppeteer the different automation tools that are in there, to sort of glue it all together, if you will, for whatever sits in your DevOps tool chain. Layered on top of that is where a lot of the secret sauce lies in the decision-making and analytics to help you visualize and see what is happening. It's not that the data doesn't already exist, but Aaron, as you said, we can bring it all together in one place, and now you can actually visualize what it looks like. You can get dependency mapping. You can look at it from a calendar point of view. You can see what the progress is and get insights and get directed to where, as a risk management group, you'd need to go and apply fixes to make sure that works, making sure that the right things are happening for every team. You can see how the software is flowing through from a continuous delivery pipeline point of view. All these visualizations are the key of what our platform provides. Really, some key takeaways then. If you've got a big release management team and they're seen as the king of no and not helping software delivery, it's time to revamp, time to move forward progressive release management, and to utilize value stream flow metrics and DevOps metrics as a guide in that journey, utilizing some of these tools to help get you there, from the insights and the rest of it, pulling it all together. And then ultimately, Ben, what you talked about of seeing the initiative tracking and ensuring that we're actually aligning business and IT. It seems crazy to me to think of those as two separate groups. Why are we not bringing together? We're one team. So with that, I think we have time for just one question. I did notice there's a few questions there. I'll ask this one. And so Ben, Aaron, one of the areas where automation becomes hard to get past is the change control board, the CAB.
Yep.
Though it's doubtful how much value is added each stage with traditional release management. How do we leverage CICD pipelines and all the rest of this stuff so we can get rid of this and get into an automated governance?
Yeah, so like when you think about it, like if a CAB was only happening once a month, it's like, how are you going to get to that point where you can release more frequently outside of that monthly cadence if you only have this manual process that will only allow you to get past it once a month? So really, what I chatted about earlier on is like, how does having these metrics facilitate, a more DevOps journey? Is you start tracking it once you can kind of say, yes, well, we have all the automated gates and criteria checked, so if we can automate the criteria of checks to say there is no high severity defects, I have completed 100% test execution, all my scope items have been approved, I have followed the whole process, I've met all my regulatory compliance. And if all that data is proven in there and you've captured it and you're following the process that's been outlined to you via, a templatized release and automated a lot of the gates and checks and quality checks in your CI/CD pipeline, then if you start proving that you're doing that in a reliable and repeatable format, then absolutely, of course, it can help you kind of move to say, how much value then is waiting for 2 weeks for someone to kind of go look at that data and say, yes, if you can prove that you're disciplined in your own processes and that it's heavily automated, then you can, of course, kind of move away from that kind of rigor.
Sounds way more effective than a once a month CAB. That means our time is up.
Yeah, here I come just to ruin the party. You guys are doing such a great job, but unfortunately, time waits for nobody, and we have only 2 minutes until the end of the webinar. So here I am to break up the party, like I said. But what a great presentation, you guys. Such great information. I do want to remind the audience that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to check it out again. The webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand, and the webinar will be living on the devops.com website. So you can always go look for it there. Just go to devops.com/webinars and look in the on-demand section. It should be right there waiting for you. I did mention at the top of the hour we would be doing a drawing for four $25 Amazon gift cards. So without further ado, let's go ahead and do that before we close things out. Our first gift card winner today is Bianca P. Congratulations, Bianca. Our second winner today is Bob D. Congratulations, Bob. Our third winner today is Dan W. Congratulations, Dan. And fourth, and certainly not the last, but certainly not the only winner, is James R. Who he's our fourth winner today. So congratulations, James. We're going to be following up with all four of you offline by email to get your gift card over to you. So please check your inbox there, and if you don't see it there, please check your spam folder. Jeff, Aaron, and Ben, thank you all. Such a great presentation, as I said before. Good stuff all the way around. Do appreciate it. I also want to thank the audience for joining me today. And this is Charlene O'Hanlon. We're at the top of the hour, so I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.
Thanks. Bye.